Can the Fujifilm X-H2s keep up with the Sony a7s III? First of all, why this unfair comparison to a camera that is almost twice the price? As a longtime user of the X-T3 as a hybrid camera for travel and family, I've always been very happy with the image quality and the camera itself. I'm a freelance filmmaker and I use the a7s III professionally, but when I heard about the X-H2s, I was excited to test it out and see if it was usable for my professional work as well. Let's take a look at the image quality. First of all, it's really good. f-log2 and the 10-bit codecs can be color graded really well and with not so much effort. And the dynamic range is on the same level as the a7s III and FX3. So as far as the image is concerned, you're not gonna see huge differences between the cameras. However, there are two areas I would like to address. One of them is sharpness. The image from the X-H2s is really sharp, even with the in-camera sharpness set to a minimum. Not that the a7s III is blurry, the Fuji's image is just a notch sharper. And that is totally a matter of taste and not necessarily a bad thing. Most people will watch videos on a small screen and a bit more sharpness can help to make the footage pop more on the screen. Where you can also see a difference is in slow motion. 60p looks really good and high quality, and the X-H2s even does it without a crop. However, the quality suffers quite a bit at more than 100 FPS, and there is quite a bit of noise in the shadows. But this is perfectly fine in this price range and should not be compared to an a7s III anyways. So to sum up the image quality, the X-H2s can keep up really well, and that's at a price point of almost half. This is where the X-H2s really shines. The ability to shoot in open gate is what gives the X-H2s a real advantage over the Sony and Canon competition. Especially for people who create content that is to be used in both 16:9 and story formats, this is really a big deal. It is also capable of UHD 4K, which is the TV standard, and DCI 4K, which is the real 4K. You can shoot internally in H.265, 264, all intra, long op, as well as ProRes. What you should know about the long op codec though is it is really taxing on the computer. With the OpenGate 6K footage in long op codec, my MacBook with an M1 Pro chip froze multiple times for a couple of seconds each time, which made it impossible to work with the footage, so I had to create proxies. With all intra, it looks much better, but then you end up with bitrates of 360 megabits per second and you'll have to think twice about the storage. For ProRes, you will need a CF Express Type B card. You'll get 512 gigs from Angelbird for around 130 US, which is an unbeatable price. But despite the good price, there is a small drawback. If you connect the camera via USB-C to the computer, it does not recognize the card. At least this is the case on my Mac, and no matter what USB configuration on the Fuji. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to buy a card reader for another 90 US. But still, this is a really good deal. In comparison, the a7s III films only in long op or all intra internally, and it cannot do OpenGate or DCI 4K, so it only does UHD 4K. In terms of recording options, the X-H2s is clearly ahead of the pack. First to the positives. You'll get 7 custom modes on the command dial and you can assign all kinds of settings to it. And since the camera can shoot in OpenGate, UHD 4K and DCI 4K, f-log or film simulations and at different frame rates, you'll find that you'll be also using the 7 custom modes. The audio menu is great, you get line or mic input, which is completely missing on Sony, and you can define 2 different gain levels for the internal microphone and external microphones. And it has many custom buttons that are arranged in a useful way. The sub monitor is a nice little addition. You can see at a glance which settings are currently active, even if you cannot see the camera's monitor at all. In addition, the sub monitor also shows if you are recording. You can see the recording time counting up as you record, and the tally light on the front of the camera is great too. I think every camera should have that. However, eventually the usability gets limited by the firmware quite a bit, which at the moment is already on 5.0 and it is still far from perfect. So here's a couple of things. When you press the white balance button, the white balance menu appears. To change the color temperature, you have to go to another submenu and then you can change the temperature. But in a very strange way with the camera's D-pad. When you use the back dial to change the white balance, the numbers will change, but in increments of 10, which makes no sense at all for white balance. Next, the focus peaking cannot be put on one of the custom buttons for whatever reason. So you have to go to a menu each time and switch the focus peaking on or off there. Another issue, the zebras can be assigned to a button, but the zebras cannot be turned on or off during a recording. So if the recording is running, you have to stop first and then you can change that. And the same goes for the F-Log View Assist, which helps you with exposure when you're filming in log profiles. It cannot be turned on or off during the recording either. This is quite impractical because often during a long interview, when you can't or don't want to interrupt the recording and you want to quickly check the levels or see what the log image looks like, you cannot do that. Also, the white balance cannot be adjusted manually at all during the recording. And for whatever reason, Fuji has not implemented a red recording box on the X-H2s. It only shows a tiny red dot. The X-T5, which according to Fujifilm is actually a photo first camera, does have a red recording box. Now, how much sense does that make? Well, as you can see, those are little things, but they really add up and they affect the camera's usability quite a bit. The firmware just isn't quite 100% there yet, and you can tell Fuji hasn't been in the professional video game for a long time. But the good news, all of this can be fixed with firmware updates. And at least Fuji is actively listening to its users and even updates older cameras, even older than the a7s III. The autofocus is not quite on the level of Sony or Canon yet, but in my eyes it is reliable enough that I would use it on a project, especially in an interview situation, for example. The phase and eye tracking works really well. To be fair, I haven't made tons and tons of tests since I did not have enough time, so I just made a couple of basic tests in daily use and that's just my initial impression. But how good the autofocus really is, of course, also depends on the lenses. The latest native Fuji lenses have fast linear motors that allow precise automatic focusing. But even there, the manual focusing ring is not ideal for filmmakers. Those are focus-by-wire lenses, so it's all electronically controlled. And if you need to focus manually and accurately, I really cannot recommend this. My slightly older 35 1.4 lens, for example, has an older focus motor that you can hear quite well. And it is not always totally reliable. Also, manual focusing on this one is no fun because the focusing ring needs a lot of force to turn, so you often end up moving the whole camera unintentionally. So my conclusion for focusing, if you want to work exclusively with autofocus, the newer Fuji lenses or also glass from Viltrox like the 30mm 1.4 work very well. If you want to focus automatically and manually, that will be a bit difficult, at least with Fujifilm lenses. Unfortunately, I cannot say how good the manual focus is with Viltrox lenses since I don't own any. I just have tested this with the older 35, the 23 f2 and the newer 23 1.4. In comparison to Sony, my 20mm Sony lens has a super smooth focusing ring that makes manual focusing really fun and easy. And at the same time, it is very reliable in autofocusing, thanks to fast and precise motors. The X-H2s is a real video heavyweight for the price. Open gate, 10-bit 422, 60p without crop, ProRes internally, good autofocus, IBIS, and it is at the same time a really excellent photo camera. From a purely image quality standpoint, I would absolutely use the X-H2s for professional projects as well. Sure, the image seems a bit over-sharpened at times, but that can be fixed with tools like Dehancer, and maybe it even gets a firmware update. However, it will not replace my a7s III as the main camera for now. The ease of use is just not quite at the level I had hoped for. Fujifilm is definitely on the right track, but it needs to work further on the firmware. And with the lenses, you are still a bit limited compared to Sony, especially if you want to focus automatically as well as manually. But as I said, for the money, the X-H2s is more than worth it, and I don't advise against using it, not at all. For me, it just doesn't fit at the moment just quite yet. The camera I'm really interested in testing is the Lumix S5 Mark II. I hope to get my hands on it soon, so stay tuned for that.